What if everything you thought you knew about the Garden of Eden was incomplete? Genesis 3:24 tells us that God placed cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Most people assume that Eden's story ends with Adam and Eve's exile and the locked gate, but ancient tradition preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church reveals something far stranger. In this investigation, we will uncover 3 hidden layers. First, we will explore the Bible that Western Christianity forgot. Then, we will meet the celestial beings who were stationed at Eden's borders long before humanity's fall. And finally, we will ask the question that changes everything. What were they really guarding? And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. The Garden of Eden sits at the heart of human origin. Every child in Sunday school learns about the serpent, the fruit, and the exile. But there is a deeper current running beneath that familiar story, a current that most modern Bibles do not even acknowledge. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition has preserved texts that were deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, or too revealing for the Western canon. These texts do not contradict Genesis. They expand it, they fill in the gaps, and they introduce us to beings whose very existence forces us to rethink what Eden was. We are not talking about folklore. We are talking about scripture. Scripture that has been read, prayed, and honored for over 1,000 years by one of the oldest Christian communities on earth. The Ethiopian Church traces its roots back to the time of the Apostles. It claims a connection to the Queen of Sheba, to King Solomon, to the Ark of the Covenant itself, and it has guarded a Bible that looks very different from the one sitting on your shelf. That Bible contains 88 books, not 66, not 73, 88. Among those books is the Book of Enoch, a text that Western councils rejected, but that Ethiopian Christians have always considered holy. Enoch was the great-grandfather of Noah. Genesis 5:24 says he walked with God and then was no more because God took him. The Book of Enoch claims to record what Enoch saw during that walk, and what he saw was not a simple moral lesson. It was a cosmic drama involving rebellion, forbidden knowledge, and beings called the Watchers. These Watchers were not demons. They were not fallen angels in the traditional sense. They were guardians, heaven's sentinels, and their assignment was Eden. They stood at the threshold between the divine and the human, between eternity and time. Their job was to observe, to protect, to keep the boundary secure. But something happened, something that the Book of Enoch describes in chilling detail. The Watchers did not stay at their posts. They did not remain neutral. They made a choice, and that choice altered the course of human history. This is not a story about temptation in a garden. This is a story about what happened after the exile. After the gates closed, after humanity was cast out into a world that was no longer paradise. Because if Eden was guarded, that means it still existed. It was still there, still protected, still holding something valuable enough to require celestial guards. And those guards were not passive statues. They were conscious, they were powerful. And according to Enoch, they were conflicted. We have been taught that the story of the fall ends with Genesis chapter 3. But what if that was only the beginning? What if the exile from Eden triggered a chain of events that involved not just humans, but the very structure of heaven itself? The Ethiopian Bible suggests exactly that. It suggests that Eden was not a location. It was a threshold, a border, a meeting point between 2 dimensions, and the beings assigned to guard it were caught in the middle. Here is what makes this so urgent. The Book of Enoch was not lost by accident. It was not forgotten because it was irrelevant. It was excluded because it was too revealing. It named the Watchers. It described their rebellion. It explained where the giants came from. It connected the dots between Eden, the flood, and the end times. And it did all of this in a way that made religious authorities uncomfortable, because if Enoch was right, then the fall of man was not an isolated event. It was part of a much larger conflict, a conflict that is still unfolding. So we have to ask, why was this text removed? Why did councils in the 4th and 5th centuries decide that Enoch's testimony was not fit for the canon? Was it because the book was unreliable? Or was it because the book was too reliable? Because it revealed too much? Because it gave humans access to knowledge that was supposed to remain locked behind Eden's gates? The Ethiopian church never had that debate. For them, Enoch was always scripture. His words were always authoritative, and his account of the Watchers was always part of the larger biblical narrative. They did not see a contradiction, they saw a completion, a fuller picture, a more honest reckoning with the forces at work in the spiritual realm. And if we are going to understand what really happened at Eden, we need to listen to what they preserved. This is not about choosing between traditions, this is about recovering what was lost, about asking the questions that were silenced, about looking at the cherubim and the flaming sword and asking, who were they really keeping out, or were they keeping something in? And if the Watchers were assigned to guard Eden, what happened when they abandoned their posts? Did the gates remain secure, or did something escape? We are about to enter a story that most churches will not teach, a story that most seminaries will not touch. But it is a story that has been preserved, protected, and passed down through centuries by a community that never stopped believing it mattered. And once you hear it, you will never read Genesis the same way again. Subscribe now, because what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the beginning. Chapter 2, the Bible you never knew existed. Let's talk about what a Bible actually is. Most people think of the Bible as a single, unified book, one collection, one canon, one set of texts that everyone agrees on. But that has never been true. From the very beginning, different Christian communities preserved different texts. They honored different traditions, and they built their theology on different foundations. The Bible you grew up with is not the only Bible that exists, and it is not the oldest. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church holds one of the most ancient Christian traditions on the planet. Ethiopia was one of the first nations to officially adopt Christianity in the 4th century, but the faith had already been there for decades, possibly centuries. Acts 8:37 mentions an Ethiopian eunuch who was reading the prophet Isaiah and who was baptized by Philip. That story is not folklore, it is history, and it marks the beginning of a Christian presence in Africa that predates most of Europe. The Ethiopian church did not receive its Bible from Rome. It did not wait for the Council of Nicaea or the Council of Trent to tell it what was scripture. It developed its own canon, rooted in ancient Jewish and early Christian traditions, and that canon is massive. It includes all the books you know, Genesis, Exodus, Psalms, the Gospels, Paul's letters, but it also includes books that were left out of the Western Bible. Books like Enoch, Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, and the Shepherd of Hermas. Some of these texts were known in the early church. Church fathers like Tertullian and Origen referenced the Book of Enoch. Jude 1:14 even quotes it directly. But by the 4th century, church councils in the West began to narrow the canon. They wanted uniformity. They wanted control. They wanted to eliminate texts that raised uncomfortable questions or that contradicted emerging doctrines. So they excluded Enoch. They excluded Jubilees. They labeled them apocryphal or pseudepigraphal. And for most of Christian history, those texts were forgotten in the West, but not in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, those texts remained scripture. They were copied by hand. They were read in liturgy. They were taught to children. And they shaped the way Ethiopian Christians understood the Bible. For them, Enoch was not a curiosity. It was canon. And its testimony about the Watchers was not a myth. It was theology. So, what does the Book of Enoch actually say? It claims to be the written testimony of Enoch, the 7th generation from Adam. Genesis 5:24 says that Enoch walked with God, and then he was taken. He did not die, he was translated, removed from the earth. The Book of Enoch explains what happened during that walk. It says that Enoch was taken into the heavens. He saw the throne of God. He met angels. He learned the secrets of creation, and he was given a mission to record what he saw and to deliver a message of judgment to the Watchers. The Watchers are introduced early in the Book of Enoch. They are described as a class of angels assigned to watch over humanity. Their name in Hebrew is Iram, which means wakeful ones. In Greek, they are called Grigori. In English, we call them Watchers. And their job was simple: observe, do not interfere, do not involve yourself in human affairs, just watch, just guard, just keep the boundary between heaven and earth intact. But they did not stay neutral. According to Enoch, 200 watchers descended to earth. They came down to Mount Hermon, a mountain on the border of ancient Israel, and they made a pact. They swore an oath. They agreed to abandon their heavenly posts and to take human wives. The text is explicit. These were not demons. These were not rebellious spirits like Satan. These were high-ranking angels, guardians, sentinels, and they chose to fall. Why would they do that? The Book of Enoch offers a reason. It says they saw the daughters of men and found them beautiful. They were attracted. They desired. They crossed a line that was never supposed to be crossed. And their leader, an angel named Semjazar, convinced the others to join him. He said, "I fear you will not agree to this deed, and I alone will pay the penalty for a great sin." So they all swore together. They bound themselves by mutual curse, and they descended. This is not the same story as the fall of Lucifer. Lucifer's rebellion was about pride, about wanting to be like God. But the Watchers' rebellion was about connection, about desire, about choosing humanity over heaven, and that makes their fall more tragic, because it was not motivated by hatred. It was motivated by something closer to love, or at least fascination. Once the Watchers descended, they did more than take wives. They began to teach. They began to reveal. They gave humanity knowledge that was never meant to be given. Enoch lists their names and their teachings. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armor. He taught them the art of war. Semjazar taught enchantments and root cutting. Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barachiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arachiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. And Sariel taught the course of the moon. These were not party tricks. These were cosmic secrets, knowledge of the heavens, knowledge of the spiritual realm, knowledge of how creation worked, and humanity was not ready for it. The text says that the earth became corrupted, violence increased, bloodshed spread, humanity began to cry out, and God took notice. Here is where the story connects back to Genesis. Genesis 6:1-4 says, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Who are the sons of God? The Book of Enoch gives the answer. They are the Watchers, and the Nephilim are their offspring, giants, hybrids, beings born from the union of the divine and the human. And those beings were not just tall, they were powerful, they were dangerous, and they threatened the order of creation itself. The Western Church has largely ignored this passage, or it has spiritualized it. Some say the sons of God were the descendants of Seth. Others say it is metaphorical, but the Ethiopian tradition takes it literally, and the Book of Enoch provides the details. It names the Watchers, it describes their actions, it explains the consequences, and it connects their rebellion to the flood, because the flood was not just about human sin. It was about genetic contamination. It was about the corruption of the bloodline. It was about the Nephilim, and it was about resetting creation to remove the influence of the Watchers. The flood was a divine response to a cosmic crisis, a crisis that began when the guardians of Eden abandoned their posts. So here is what we know so far. Eden was guarded. The Watchers were the guards. They fell. They taught forbidden knowledge. They fathered the Nephilim, and God responded with a flood. But that raises a new question. If the Watchers were guarding Eden, what happened to Eden after they left? Did it remain protected, or was it left vulnerable? And if it was still guarded, who took over? The Ethiopian Bible does not shy away from these questions. It does not pretend the answers are simple. It presents a worldview in which the spiritual realm is active, structured, and involved in human history. It presents a God who does not just watch from a distance, but who intervenes, who judges, and who protects. And it presents humanity as caught in the middle of a war that started long before Adam took the fruit. Like this video if you are beginning to see how deep this story goes, because we are just getting started. Chapter 3: Enoch's Forbidden Chronicle. Enoch was not a prophet in the traditional sense. He did not stand in the city square and call people to repentance. He did not confront kings or challenge empires. He walked with God, that is what Genesis says, and then he was taken, removed, translated. He did not die. He did not fade into old age. He simply left, and the book of Enoch claims to tell us what happened next. The book is divided into several sections: the book of the Watchers, the book of parables, the astronomical book, the book of dreams, and the epistle of Enoch. Each section serves a different purpose. Some describe visions, some record teachings, some lay out cosmic geography, and some deliver judgment, but they all share a common thread. They reveal what is normally hidden. They pull back the curtain on the spiritual realm, and they show us a universe that is far more complex than most sermons suggest. The Book of the Watchers is the most relevant section for our investigation. It opens with Enoch being called by God to deliver a message, not to humans, specifically to the Watchers who had fallen. Enoch is told to go to them and to pronounce judgment, to tell them that they will be bound, that their children will be destroyed, that they will watch their offspring kill each other, and that they will remain imprisoned until the final judgment. This is a stunning role reversal. Enoch, a human, is sent to judge angels. He becomes the messenger of God's verdict, and the Watchers, who once stood in the presence of God, are now cut off. They are told that their prayers will not be heard, that their intercession is worthless, that they have forfeited their place in heaven. And Enoch is the one who has to tell them. The text describes Enoch's journey. He is taken up into the heavens. He sees the throne of God, surrounded by fire and lightning. He sees the cherubim, the seraphim, and the archangels. He sees the chambers of the winds, the storehouses of the snow, and the fountains of the deep. He is given a tour of creation, and then he is sent back down to deliver the judgment. When Enoch meets the Watchers, they are terrified. They beg him to intercede on their behalf. They ask him to write a petition to God. They acknowledge their guilt but plead for mercy. Enoch agrees to try. He writes the petition. He brings it before God, and God's answer is final. There will be no mercy. The Watchers chose to fall. They chose to corrupt, and now they will face the consequences. But here is what makes this so important. The Watchers are not sent to hell immediately. They are bound in a specific location, a place called Tartarus, or the Abyss, and they are kept there until the day of judgment. This matches what the New Testament says. 2 Peter 2:4 says, God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them into chains of darkness to be held for judgment. Jude 1:6 says, and the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. So the New Testament confirms the basic outline of what Enoch describes. Angels sinned, they were bound, they are awaiting judgment, and their sin was connected to abandoning their assignment. The Western Church acknowledges this, but it does not explore it. It does not ask who these angels were, what they did, or why it mattered. The Ethiopian tradition does, and it points directly to the Book of Enoch for the details. Now let's talk about what the Watchers taught, Because this is where the story gets even more disturbing. The knowledge they gave humanity was not neutral. It was not just science or technology. It was knowledge of the heavens, knowledge of the calendar, knowledge of astrology, knowledge of enchantments, and knowledge of warfare. These were tools of power, tools of control, tools that elevated humanity beyond its intended limits. Azazel, one of the chief watchers, is singled out for special condemnation. The text says he taught men to make weapons. He taught them violence. He taught them how to kill more efficiently. And he also taught women the art of cosmetics and adornment. That might sound trivial, but in the ancient world, adornment was connected to seduction, to ritual, and to manipulation. Azazel gave humanity the tools to harm and the tools to deceive, and for that he was judged more harshly than the others. The other watchers taught different things. Semjaza taught sorcery, Amaros taught counterspells, Barakiel taught astrology. They were initiations. They gave humanity access to the spiritual realm. They taught humans how to manipulate forces they did not understand, and they did it without permission, without oversight, without safeguards. This is why the knowledge was called forbidden, not because it was false, but because it was dangerous. It gave humanity power without wisdom, strength without restraint, and it destabilized the natural order. Humans began to act like gods. They began to reach beyond their limits, and the result was chaos. Here is the parallel we need to see. In Genesis, the serpent tempted Eve by saying, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." The fruit gave knowledge, but the watchers took that temptation to the next level. They did not just offer knowledge, they offered technique, they offered method, they offered the means to act on that knowledge. And that made them far more dangerous than the serpent ever was. The Book of Enoch also describes the offspring of the watchers, the Nephilim. It says they were giants, 300 cubits tall. That is about 450 feet. Now, whether that is literal or symbolic is debated, but the point is clear. These were beings of immense size and power. They consumed everything. They devoured the produce of the earth, and when that was not enough, they began to eat humans. They became predators, monsters, and the earth cried out under their weight. God's response was decisive. He commanded the archangel Michael to bind the watchers. He commanded Gabriel to destroy the Nephilim by turning them against each other. He commanded Raphael to heal the earth, and he commanded Uriel to warn Noah of the coming flood. The flood was not just about human sin, it was about cleansing the earth of the Nephilim, about removing the genetic corruption, about resetting creation. And here is where it gets personal. Enoch is told that a remnant will survive, that Noah and his family will be saved, that the line of humanity will continue, but the watchers will remain bound. Their children will be destroyed, and their influence will be erased. Except it was not entirely erased, because Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, after the flood, after the reset. They came back. How? That is a question we will explore later, but for now, the key point is this: the Book of Enoch is not a fairy tale. It is a testimony, a witness account, a record of cosmic events that shaped human history. And the Ethiopian church has preserved it because they believe it matters. They believe it is true, and they believe it is still relevant, because if the watchers fell once, could it happen again? If they taught forbidden knowledge once, could they teach it again? And if the Nephilim returned once, could they return again? These are not abstract questions. They are warnings. And the Book of Enoch presents them as part of the biblical narrative. Comment below if you have ever heard this taught in church, because most people have not, and that silence is not an accident. Chapter 4, The Watchers, Heaven's First Rebels. Who were the Watchers before they fell? This is a question the Book of Enoch answers in detail. They were not low-ranking angels. They were not foot soldiers in the heavenly host. They were leaders, princes, chiefs of tens, chiefs of 50s, chiefs of hundreds. They had authority, they had responsibility, and they had access to the throne of God. The text names 20 of them: Semjaza, Azazel, Amaras, Barakiel, Kokabiel, Ezekiel, Arakiel, Shamshiel, Sariel, Teruel, Yomiel, and others. Each name has meaning. Semjaza means name of God. Azazel means name of God. Strengthens. Barakiel means lightning of God. These were not random beings. They were created with purpose, and their names reflected their connection to the divine. They were assigned to watch over humanity. That was their mission. Genesis does not explain when this assignment began, but the Book of Enoch implies it was early, possibly right after the exile from Eden. Humanity had been cast out, the gates had been shut, the cherubim and the flaming sword had been set in place, and the watchers were stationed nearby, not inside Eden, but on the borders, at the threshold, watching, waiting, guarding. Their job was to observe without interfering, to protect without engaging, to maintain the boundary between the divine and the human. But that boundary was not physical, it was spiritual, it was ontological, it was the difference between mortal and immortal, between flesh and spirit, between time and eternity, and the watchers stood in the middle. Here is the tension. They were close to humanity, close enough to see, to hear, to feel, but they were not human. They were angels. And angels, according to traditional theology, do not have bodies. They do not have desires. They do not have atabayas. They do not have appetites, except the Book of Enoch says they did, or at least they developed them. The text describes the moment of decision. The watchers saw the daughters of men. They saw their beauty, and they desired them. This was not a passing thought. It was a consuming longing, a choice to cross the line. And Semjaza, their leader, proposed a plan. He said, "Let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget children." But he also said, "I fear you will not agree to this deed, and I alone will pay the penalty for a great sin." That statement is critical. Semjaza knew what he was proposing was wrong. He knew it would have consequences. But he also knew that if they all fell together, the blame would be shared, the judgment would be distributed. So he made them swear an oath. He made them bind themselves by mutual curse. And once the oath was taken, there was no turning back. This was not a spontaneous act. It was premeditated. It was planned. It was a conspiracy. And it involved 200 angels. That is not a small number. That is a significant portion of the heavenly host. And their collective rebellion suggests that something deeper was happening, something more than simple lust. Some scholars suggest the Watchers were trying to redeem humanity, that they saw humanity suffering, struggling, exiled from paradise, and they wanted to help. So they gave knowledge, they gave tools, they gave power. But if that was their motive, it was misguided, because the knowledge they gave was not redemptive, it was destructive. It accelerated corruption, it multiplied violence, and it led to the flood. Others suggest the Watchers were motivated by pride, that they wanted to create their own race, their own legacy, beings that were part divine, part human, beings that would be greater than humans but lesser than angels. A new species, a hybrid, and the Nephilim were the result. But even that explanation does not fully account for the tragedy in the text, because the Watchers are not portrayed as villains. They are portrayed as tragic figures, beings who loved unwisely, who chose wrongly, and who lost everything. The Book of Enoch describes their punishment in detail. They are bound in chains. They are cast into darkness. They are made to watch their children destroy each other. And they are told they will remain imprisoned until the day of judgment. That day is described as the great day, the final day, the day when all accounts are settled. And on that day, the Watchers will be cast into the lake of fire along with Satan and the demons. But until that day, they remain bound but conscious, imprisoned but aware, and according to some traditions, they still whisper, they still influence, They still reach out from their prison to corrupt, to deceive, and to destroy, because even in chains they have not repented. Even in darkness they have not surrendered. This raises a question. If the Watchers are bound, who is guarding Eden now? If they abandoned their posts, did God assign new guards, or did the cherubim and the flaming sword take over entirely? And if Eden is still guarded, what does that mean? Does it mean Eden still exists? Does it mean the tree of life is still there? Does it mean there is still a way back? The Ethiopian tradition says yes. They say Eden is still real, still protected, still waiting, and they say the guards are still there. Not the fallen Watchers, but faithful angels, beings who did not fall, beings who remained obedient, and they are waiting for the day when the gates open again, not for Adam, not for Eve, but for those who have been redeemed. This is not mainstream theology, but it is ancient theology. It is the theology of a church that never stopped reading Enoch, never stopped believing that the spiritual realm is active, structured, and involved in human history, and never stopped teaching that the story of Eden is not over. Share this video if you want to help others discover what has been hidden. Chapter 5. The pack that shook two worlds. Mount Hermon sits on the border of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. It is the highest peak in the region. It is snow-capped most of the year. And it is the place where, according to the book of Enoch, 200 angels descended to make a pact that would change the course of history. The mountain's name is significant. Hermon comes from the Hebrew word harem, which means something devoted to destruction, a curse, a ban, and that is exactly what happened there. The Watchers gathered on the summit. They swore an oath, and they cursed themselves. They bound themselves to a decision that would lead to their destruction. Enoch describes the moment in stark terms. The Watchers came down, they stood together, and they agreed. They would take wives, they would teach humanity, and they would not turn back. The oath was not just a promise, it was a binding spell, a magical contract, and once it was spoken, it was irreversible. Why did they need an oath? Because they knew the risk. They knew they were violating divine law. They knew they would be judged. And they were afraid that if only one or two of them fell, they would be destroyed immediately. But if all of them fell together, perhaps God would hesitate. Perhaps he would negotiate. Perhaps he would show mercy because the rebellion was so widespread. That calculation was wrong. God did not hesitate. He did not negotiate, and he did not show mercy. But the Watchers did not know that when they made the pact, they were gambling, and they lost. The text names Semjaza as the leader, but it also names Azazel as the most guilty. Why? Because Azazel was the one who taught violence, who gave humanity weapons, who showed them how to kill. The other Watchers taught knowledge. Azazel taught destruction, and for that, his punishment is unique. He is bound hand and foot. He is cast into a desert place called Dudael. He is covered with sharp rocks, and he is left in darkness until the day of judgment. The punishment fit the crime. Azazel gave humanity the tools to harm each other, so he is bound in a place of pain. He taught them to fight, so he is left in isolation. He opened the door to violence, so he is surrounded by sharpness and suffering. And the text says he will remain there until the final day, when he will be cast into the fire. The other Watchers are also bound, but in different places. Some are imprisoned in valleys, some are chained in the depths of the earth, and some are kept in Tartarus, a place of utter darkness. Each one is separated from the others. Each one is left alone with his guilt, and each one is forced to watch the consequences of his actions unfold on the earth above. Because the Nephilim did not die quietly. They turned on each other. They became violent. They consumed everything. And when there was nothing left to consume, they began to devour humans. The earth became a horror, a nightmare, and humanity cried out to God for deliverance. God's response was swift. He sent the archangels. Michael was commanded to bind the Watchers. Gabriel was commanded to destroy the Nephilim by inciting them to war against each other. Raphael was commanded to heal the earth after the cleansing, and Uriel was commanded to warn Noah. The flood was not just a natural disaster. It was a targeted intervention, a divine reset, and its purpose was not just to judge human sin. It was to remove the genetic corruption introduced by the Watchers, to wipe out the Nephilim, to restore the purity of the human race, and to give humanity a fresh start. But even after the flood, the problem was not entirely solved. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, after the flood. How? The text does not explain, but later biblical narratives mention giants in the land of Canaan. Goliath was a giant. Og, king of Bashan, was a giant. The Anakim were giants, and they were all described as remnants of an older race. Some scholars suggest that the Nephilim survived through Noah's daughters-in-law, that one of them carried the corrupted bloodline. Others suggest that after the flood, some of the imprisoned Watchers found a way to influence humanity again, to corrupt again, to create new hybrid beings. The text is not clear, but the pattern is undeniable. The Nephilim came back, and Israel was commanded to destroy them. Why? Because they were not fully human. Because they carried the mark of the Watchers, because they represented a corruption of God's design, and because their existence threatened the purity of the line that would lead to the Messiah. This is not about racism. This is about ontology, about the nature of being, about what it means to be human, and about protecting that definition from contamination. The Book of Enoch makes it clear. The Watchers' Pact was not just a sin, it was a cosmic crime. It violated the order of creation. It crossed boundaries that were meant to be permanent, and it set in motion a chain of events that led to the flood, to the binding of the Watchers, and to the ongoing struggle between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And here is the key. That struggle is not over. The Watchers are still bound, but they are not silent. They still whisper, they still influence, and they still corrupt. Because the spiritual realm is not static, it is active, it is engaged, and it is at war. Subscribe if you want to understand the spiritual forces shaping our world. Chapter 6: Knowledge that should have stayed hidden. There is a reason the tree in Eden was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge was the issue, not fruit, not disobedience in the abstract, but knowledge. Humanity was not ready for it. Humanity was not mature enough, and when they took it anyway, the consequences were catastrophic. The Watchers gave humanity a second dose of forbidden knowledge, and this time it was not just moral knowledge. It was technical knowledge, operational knowledge, knowledge of how to manipulate the physical and spiritual realms. And humanity was even less prepared for that than they were for the fruit. The Book of Enoch lists the teachings in detail. Azazel taught the making of swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He taught the art of war. Before the Watchers, humans fought with sticks and stones. After the Watchers, they fought with metal, they fought with strategy, they fought with weapons designed to kill efficiently, and violence exploded. Samjaza taught enchantments and root cutting. This was sorcery, magic, the manipulation of spiritual forces through ritual and incantation. It gave humans the ability to call on powers they did not understand, to bind spirits, to curse enemies, to manipulate reality. And it opened doors that were never meant to be opened. Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. In other words, counter magic. If someone cursed you, Amaros could teach you how to break the curse. But that also meant an arms race. Magic and counter-magic, curse and counter-curse, and the spiritual realm became a battlefield. Barakiel taught astrology, the signs of the heavens, the movement of the stars, the influence of the planets. This was not astronomy, it was divination, the belief that the heavens control human destiny. that the stars determine your fate, and it led humanity to worship the creation instead of the creator. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arachiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. These were not innocent lessons in natural science. They were initiations into cosmic knowledge, knowledge that was meant to remain in heaven, knowledge that gave humans the ability to predict, to manipulate, and to control forces far beyond their authority. And then there was Penemu. Penemu is one of the most tragic figures in the Book of Enoch. He taught humanity the art of writing. He taught them how to use ink and paper. He taught them wisdom. He taught them how to record, to preserve, and to pass down knowledge, and for that he was condemned. Why? Because writing gave humanity the ability to preserve forbidden knowledge. Before Penemu, knowledge was oral. It could be forgotten. It could be lost. But after Penemu, knowledge could be written down. It could be copied. It could spread. And once it was written, it could not be erased. Writing was a tool of permanence, and it made the corruption introduced by the Watchers permanent. Penemu also taught something else. He taught the structure of creation, the mechanics of Eden, the names of the guardians, the seals that separate worlds. He gave humanity a map of the spiritual realm, a guide to the invisible, and that was the most dangerous gift of all, because it meant humans could navigate the spiritual realm. They could find the gates, they could approach the boundaries, and they could try to force their way back into Eden. This is why the knowledge was forbidden, not because God wanted to keep humans ignorant, but because knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, power without restraint is destructive, and access without maturity is catastrophic. Humanity was meant to grow into knowledge, to earn it, to be ready for it. But the Watchers gave it too soon, and the result was chaos. Here is the modern parallel. We live in an age of information. We have access to more knowledge than any generation in history. We can search anything, learn anything, access anything. But are we wiser? Are we more mature? Are we more capable of handling that knowledge responsibly? Or have we simply become more dangerous? The Watchers gave humanity fire before they understood heat. They gave them wings before they understood flight. And they gave them swords before they understood peace. The result was predictable. Humanity turned the gifts into weapons. They used knowledge to harm. They used knowledge to dominate. And they used access to corrupt. And the earth suffered. Genesis 6:1 says the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. That was the direct result of the Watchers' teachings. The knowledge they gave did not elevate humanity. It poisoned humanity. It accelerated the fall. And it made the flood necessary. But here is the question we need to ask. If the Watchers gave forbidden knowledge once, could it happen again? If writing preserved that knowledge once, could it preserve it again? And if humanity is still trying to access Eden, still trying to cross the boundaries, still trying to become like God, what does that mean for us today? The Ethiopian tradition says the knowledge is still here, still preserved, still accessible. But it also says the guardians are still watching, still protecting, still enforcing the boundaries. And it warns that those who seek forbidden knowledge without divine permission will face the same judgment as the Watchers. Like this video if you are beginning to see the connections. Chapter 7. Eden was never just a garden. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the Garden of Eden. What do you see? Probably trees, rivers, animals. Adam and Eve walking in innocence. A peaceful pastoral scene. A place of rest and beauty. That is how Eden is usually imagined, but the Ethiopian Bible suggests something very different. It suggests Eden was not a garden, it was a fortress. Genesis 3:24 says that after Adam and Eve were exiled, God placed cherubim and a flaming sword at the east of the garden to guard the way to the tree of life. Most people read that and think of angels standing with weapons, but the Hebrew text is more complex. It does not say the cherubim held a flaming sword. It says the flaming sword turned every direction. It rotated. It moved on its own. That is not a weapon. That is a system, a mechanism, a defense grid. And the cherubim were not holding it. They were operating it, or they were part of it. The image is not of guards standing at a gate. The image is of a threshold protected by something far more advanced, something divine, something technological. The cherubim themselves are not what we imagine. Popular art depicts them as chubby babies with wings. But the biblical description is far stranger. Ezekiel 10 describes cherubim as having 4 faces: the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. They have 4 wings covered with eyes. They move in any direction without turning. And they are accompanied by wheels within wheels, also covered with eyes, that move with them. This is not a comforting image. This is a terrifying image. These are not gentle guardians. They are beings of immense power and otherness. And they are stationed at the entrance to Eden, not to welcome, but to block, not to invite, but to prevent. The flaming sword is equally mysterious. The Hebrew word for sword is sheriff, but the word for flaming is lahat, which can also mean a blade of flame or a tongue of fire. Some scholars suggest it refers to lightning. Others suggest it refers to a rotating barrier of fire. Still others suggest it is a metaphor for divine energy, a force field, a boundary that cannot be crossed without being consumed. The point is this: Eden was protected, heavily protected, and the protection was not symbolic, it was real, physical, operational, and it was designed to keep humanity out, not because God was being cruel, but because humanity in its fallen state could not survive in Eden. The tree of life was still there, and if fallen humanity ate from it, they would live forever in their corrupted state. That would be a nightmare, an eternal curse, so God blocked the way. But that raises a question. If Eden was blocked, why did it need guards? If the flaming sword was enough, why station cherubim? Unless the threat was not just from humans, unless there were other beings who might try to access Eden. Beings like the Watchers. The Book of Enoch suggests that the Watchers were stationed near Eden, not inside, but nearby, on the borders, at the threshold. Their job was to watch, to guard, to prevent anyone from approaching. But when they fell, they abandoned their posts, and that left Eden vulnerable, or at least it required a new strategy, a new defense. And the cherubim and the flaming sword were that defense. This reframes the entire story. Eden was not just a garden, it was a gateway, a portal, a meeting point between heaven and earth, a place where the divine and the human could interact. And after the fall, that gateway had to be sealed, not destroyed, not removed, but sealed. Protected, kept intact until the time when it could be reopened. The Ethiopian tradition takes this literally. They believe Eden still exists, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual concept, but as a real place, a hidden place, a protected place. And they believe the cherubim are still there, still guarding, still waiting. Where is Eden? The tradition does not say. Some suggest it is in another dimension. Some suggest it is hidden in the heavens. Some suggest it is on earth, but invisible, inaccessible, protected by divine power. The location does not matter as much as the fact. Eden is real. Eden is guarded. And Eden is waiting. And here is the part that most people miss. The tree of life is still there, still bearing fruit. And according to Revelation 22:2, it will one day be accessible again. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. The fruit is for those who have been redeemed. And the river that flows from it will water the new earth. That means Eden is not a relic of the past. It is a promise of the future. It is not something we lost. It is something we are returning to. And the cherubim are not blocking the way forever. They are holding the line until the time is right, until the price has been paid, until the curse has been lifted. And that is where Jesus comes in. Hebrews 10:19-20 says, "We have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is, his body." The curtain in the temple was a symbol, a representation of the barrier between God and humanity. And when Jesus died, that curtain was torn in two. The way was opened. The path was cleared. Not back to Eden in the old sense, but forward to a new Eden, a restored Eden, an Eden without the curse, without the serpent, without the possibility of fall. And the cherubim will not block that entrance. They will welcome it, because the price has been paid, the judgment has been satisfied, and the tree of life is available again. But until that day, the guards remain. The flaming sword still turns, and Eden is still protected, not from those who have been redeemed, but from those who would try to force their way in, from those who would try to access the tree of life without permission, from those who would try to become like God through their own effort. Comment below if you have ever wondered where Eden is. Chapter 8. The Cherubim and the Flaming Technology. Let's talk about the cherubim, because they are far stranger than most people realize. The word cherub appears over 90 times in the Bible, but the descriptions are not consistent. Sometimes they are depicted as humanoid, sometimes they are depicted as hybrid creatures, and sometimes they are depicted as something almost mechanical. The most detailed description comes from Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 1, the prophet sees a vision of 4 living creatures. Each has 4 faces: a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. Each has 4 wings. 2 wings are used for flying. 2 wings cover their bodies. They have human hands under their wings. Their legs are straight, and their feet are like the feet of a calf, gleaming like polished bronze. And then there are the wheels. Ezekiel describes wheels beside each creature. The wheels are tall and awesome. Their rims are full of eyes all around. The wheels move with the creatures. When the creatures rise, the wheels rise. When the creatures stop, the wheels stop, and the wheels do not turn when they move. They move in any direction without rotating. This is not a normal description. This is something else, something that sounds almost technological. Some scholars have suggested that Ezekiel was describing something beyond his understanding, that he was using the language of his time to describe something from another realm, something divine, something operational. The cherubim are also connected to the throne of God. Psalm 18:10 says, "He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind." Psalm 81 says, "You who sit enthroned between the cherubim shine forth." The cherubim are not just guards, they are vehicles. They are manifestations of divine presence. They are the interface between God and creation, and they are stationed at Eden. Genesis 3:24 places them there, not as decoration, not as symbols, but as functional guardians. And they are equipped with the flaming sword, a sword that turns every direction, a sword that operates on its own, a sword that cannot be bypassed. What is the flaming sword? The Hebrew word lahat suggests fire, but not ordinary fire, divine fire, fire that consumes without burning, fire that consumes without burning, fire that protects without destroying the protected thing. This is the same kind of fire that appeared in the burning bush, the same kind of fire that led Israel through the wilderness as a pillar of fire, the same kind of fire that will one day purify the earth. Some theologians suggest the flaming sword represents the holiness of God, that it is a barrier of purity, that fallen humanity cannot pass through it because sin cannot survive in the presence of holiness. That makes sense theologically. But it also makes sense literally. Because the text does not say the sword represents holiness. It says the sword is there, physically, operationally, turning, moving, guarding. The Ethiopian tradition takes this literally. They believe the flaming sword is a real thing, a real force, a real barrier. And they believe the cherubim are real beings operating that barrier, not angels in the fluffy harp-playing sense, but powerful, otherworldly beings executing a divine command. And here is where it gets interesting. If the cherubim are stationed at Eden, and if Eden is still real, then the cherubim are still there, still operating, still guarding. The assignment has not been lifted, the protection has not been removed, and that means there is still something worth protecting. What is being protected? The tree of life. Genesis 3:22 says, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." God was not being petty. He was being merciful, because if fallen humanity ate from the tree of life, they would be locked into their fallen state forever. No chance of redemption, no possibility of restoration, just eternal brokenness. So the tree had to be protected, not destroyed, protected, because one day it would be needed again. One day, redeemed humanity would eat from it, and they would live forever, not in corruption, but in wholeness, and the cherubim would allow it, because the blood of Christ would have opened the way. But until that day, the cherubim remain, and the flaming sword remains, and the boundary remains, and anyone who tries to cross it without permission will be consumed, not because God is harsh, but because holiness and corruption cannot coexist, because divine fire purifies, and because the way back to Eden must be through redemption, not through force. This is why the Ethiopian tradition is so insistent. Eden is not a metaphor, it is a place, a real place, and it is guarded by real beings with real power. And the reason the Western Church stopped teaching this is not because it is false, it is because it is uncomfortable, because it suggests that the spiritual realm is more complex than we want to admit, because it suggests that there are forces, structures, and beings that operate according to rules we do not fully understand. And here is the challenge. If the cherubim are still guarding Eden, and if Eden is still real, then what does that mean for us? Does it mean we should try to find it? Does it mean we should try to access it? No. It means we should respect the boundary, we should honor the protection, and we should trust that when the time is right, the way will be opened. Not by us, but by God. Share this video if you want others to see this truth. Chapter 9. The Nephilim. Children of two realms. The Nephilim are one of the most mysterious and controversial topics in the Bible. Genesis 6:4 mentions them briefly. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. That is all Genesis says, but the book of Enoch expands the story dramatically. The Nephilim were the offspring of the Watchers and human women. They were hybrids, part divine, part human, and they were massive. The text says they were 300 cubits tall. That is about 450 feet. Now, some scholars suggest that number is symbolic, that it represents power and dominance rather than literal height. But even if it is symbolic, the point is clear. The Nephilim were giants, and they were dangerous. They were not just physically large, they were spiritually powerful. They inherited knowledge from their fathers. They understood the heavens. They understood magic. They understood the structure of creation. And they used that knowledge to dominate. They consumed the produce of the earth. They ate livestock. They ate wild animals. And when there was nothing left, they began to eat humans. The book of Enoch describes a world overrun by the Nephilim, a world where humanity was prey, where violence was the norm, where every thought was evil, and where the earth itself cried out for deliverance. This was not just moral corruption. This was genetic corruption. This was ontological corruption. This was a violation of what it means to be human. God's response was the flood. But before the flood, God commanded the archangel Gabriel to incite the Nephilim to war against each other, to turn them on themselves, to let them destroy each other. And that is what happened. The Nephilim fought. they killed each other, and by the time the flood came, most of them were already dead. But some survived, or at least some came back. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, after the flood. How? The text does not say. But later books of the Bible mention giants in the land of Canaan, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, and Goliath, the giant David fought, is described as a descendant of the Rephaim. Some scholars suggest the Nephilim bloodline survived through Noah's daughters-in-law, that one of them carried the corrupted gene. Others suggest that after the flood, some of the bound watchers found another way to influence humanity, to corrupt the bloodline again, to create new hybrids. The text is not clear, but the pattern is consistent. The giants came back, and God commanded Israel to destroy them. Deuteronomy 2 and 3 describe battles against Og, king of Bashan, whose bed was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. That is 13 feet by 6 feet. He was a giant, and Israel was told to kill him and all his people. Why? Because they were Nephilim, because they carried the corruption, because their existence threatened the purity of the messianic line. This is not about racism. This is about ontology, about what it means to be human, and about protecting that definition from contamination. The Nephilim were not fully human. They were hybrids, and their presence in the land was a continuation of the corruption that the flood was meant to erase. The Book of Enoch also describes what happened to the spirits of the Nephilim after they died. It says that because they were born from human mothers, their bodies died. But because their fathers were angels, their spirits did not die. Instead, they became demons, disembodied spirits, wandering the earth, seeking bodies to inhabit, seeking to corrupt, seeking to destroy. This explains a lot. It explains where demons come from. It explains why they seek to possess humans. It explains why they are so hostile to humanity. Because they are the spirits of beings who were never supposed to exist, beings who were a violation of creation, and beings who are now trapped between worlds, not fully spirit, not fully flesh, just restless, angry, and destructive. Jesus encountered these spirits. The Gospels record multiple instances of demon possession, and in every case, Jesus cast them out. He commanded them, he bound them, he sent them away, and they obeyed, because Jesus has authority over the spiritual realm, authority over the offspring of the Watchers, authority over the corruption that started in Eden. And here is the key. The Nephilim are not just ancient history. The Book of Enoch suggests they will return, not in the same form, but in the same pattern, that in the last days there will be a resurgence of corruption, a resurgence of hybridization, a resurgence of beings that are not fully human, and that this will be a sign of the end times. Revelation 9 describes locusts coming out of the abyss, locusts with human faces, locusts with women's hair, locusts with lions' teeth, locusts with iron breastplates. These are not ordinary locusts. These are hybrid beings, and they are released in the last days. Are they Nephilim? Are they demons? Are they something else? The text does not say, but the pattern is clear. The corruption that started with the Watchers will return, and when it does, the faithful will need to recognize it. They will need to resist it, and they will need to trust that the same God who judged the Nephilim in the past will judge them again in the future. Because the spiritual war is not over. The boundaries are still being tested, and the guardians are still watching. Like this video if you want to be prepared for what is coming. Chapter 10. The Flood as Cosmic Reset. The flood was not just about water. It was not just about water. It was about cleansing, about resetting, about removing a corruption so deep that only a complete restart could fix it. Genesis 6:5 says, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." Every inclination, every thought, only evil. That is total corruption. But the corruption was not just moral. It was genetic. It was spiritual. It was ontological. The Nephilim had contaminated the human race. The Watchers had introduced knowledge that was never meant to be given, and humanity had become something other than what God intended. So God decided to reset. But God did not reset everything. He preserved Noah and his family. Genesis 6:9 says, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God." The word blameless in Hebrew is tamim. It means complete, whole, undefiled. Some scholars suggest it refers to Noah's moral character. Others suggest it refers to his genetic purity, that Noah's bloodline had not been corrupted by the Nephilim, that he was fully human, and that is why he was chosen. God commanded Noah to build an ark, not a small boat, a massive vessel, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. That is about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, large enough to hold Noah, his family, and representatives of every kind of animal, and large enough to survive a global flood. The flood came. Genesis 7:1 says, "On that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened." This was not just rain. This was a breaking of the boundaries. The waters above and the waters below met. The separation established at creation was temporarily undone, and the entire earth was covered. Every living thing on the surface died. Every human, every animal, every Nephilim. The flood was thorough. It was complete. It was a cosmic reset, and when the waters receded, the earth was clean. The Nephilim were gone. The corruption was removed, and humanity had a fresh start. But the Watchers were not destroyed. They were already bound, already imprisoned, already awaiting judgment. The flood did not affect them. It affected their offspring, and it affected the humans who had aligned themselves with the Watchers' corruption. But the Watchers themselves remained, chained in darkness, waiting for the final day. And here is where it gets complicated. Genesis 6:4 says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, after the flood. How did they come back? The text does not explain, but Numbers 13:33 mentions the Nephilim in Canaan. The spies who scouted the land reported, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Some scholars suggest the Nephilim bloodline survived through Noah's daughters-in-law, that one of them was a carrier. Others suggest that after the flood, the bound Watchers influenced humanity again, that they whispered from their prison, that they corrupted new bloodlines, that they created new hybrids. The mechanism is unclear, but the result is undeniable. The giants came back, and God commanded Israel to destroy them. The conquest of Canaan was not just about taking land. It was about finishing what the flood started. It was about removing the remaining corruption. It was about cleansing the land so that the messianic line could be established without contamination. And Israel was the instrument. Deuteronomy 20:16-17 says, "In the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes, completely destroy them." That sounds harsh, but it makes sense in context. The nations in Canaan were not just pagan, they were corrupted. They practiced child sacrifice. They worshipped demons. And they carried the bloodline of the Nephilim. They had to be removed. And when Israel obeyed, they succeeded. When they disobeyed, they failed. Judges records multiple instances of Israel failing to fully drive out the inhabitants. And every time those remaining inhabitants became a snare. They led Israel into idolatry, into corruption, into compromise, because the spiritual corruption was still there, and it spread. The flood was meant to be final, but humanity's continued rebellion allowed the corruption to creep back in, not to the same extent, but enough to require ongoing vigilance, enough to require ongoing judgment, and enough to set the stage for the final battle. Because the Book of Enoch describes a final judgment, a day when the Watchers will be brought out of their prison, when they will be judged publicly, when they will be cast into the lake of fire, and when the earth will be cleansed once and for all, not with water, but with fire. 2 Peter 3:10 says, "The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare." That is the final reset, the final cleansing. And after that, there will be a new heaven and a new earth, a creation without corruption, without the possibility of fall, without the influence of the Watchers, without the threat of the Nephilim, and Eden will be restored, not the old Eden, but a new Eden. Revelation 22 describes it. The tree of life is there, the river of life is there, the throne of God is there, and the gates are open, not guarded. Open because the corruption has been removed, the price has been paid, and the redeemed can enter freely. But until that day, the story continues. The boundaries are still being tested. The corruption is still trying to creep back in, and the guardians are still watching, still protecting, still waiting. Comment below if you are beginning to see the bigger picture. Chapter 11, The Watchers Who Never Stopped Watching here, is the question that haunts the entire story. If the Watchers fell, if they were bound, if they are imprisoned in darkness awaiting judgment, then who is guarding Eden now? Who took over their assignment? Who stands at the threshold between the divine and the human? The Ethiopian tradition has an answer. The ones who did not fall, the ones who remained obedient, the ones who kept their posts, because not all the Watchers fell. The Book of Enoch mentions 200 who descended, but how many were there originally? Thousands, tens of thousands, the text does not say, but it implies that the fallen were a minority. The faithful Watchers are still there, still watching, still guarding. They did not abandon their posts. They did not take human wives. They did not take human wives. They did not teach forbidden knowledge. They remained loyal, and they are still loyal, and they are waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for the day when the gates open. Waiting for the day when the redeemed are allowed to return. Waiting for the day when the tree of life is accessible again. And waiting for the day when they can welcome humanity back instead of keeping them out. Because that is the ultimate hope. Not just judgment, not just cleansing, but restoration. The story of the Watchers is a tragedy, but it is also a promise that the corruption will be removed, that the boundaries will be restored, that the rebellion will be judged, and that the faithful will be rewarded. The Book of Enoch describes a vision of the end times. Enoch sees the Watchers being brought out of their prison. He sees them standing before the throne of God. He sees them judged, and he sees them cast into the fire. And then he sees the earth renewed, the mountains lowered, the valleys raised, the rivers flowing with pure water, and humanity living in peace. This is not just poetry. This is prophecy. This is the Ethiopian Church's vision of the future, a future in which the spiritual realm is set right. A future in which the corruption introduced by the Watchers is finally and fully removed, and a future in which Eden is restored. But the restoration is not automatic. It requires redemption. It requires the blood of Christ. It requires humanity to choose, to repent, to believe, to follow, because the path back to Eden is not through knowledge. It is not through power. It is not through rebellion. It is through submission, through faith, through the cross. And that is why the Ethiopian tradition has preserved these texts, not because they are obsessed with the past, but because they are focused on the future. They believe the story of the Watchers is not over. They believe the spiritual war is still being fought, and they believe the final victory is coming. The Book of Enoch ends with a promise that the righteous will shine like the stars, that they will live forever, that they will eat from the tree of life, that they will walk with God as Enoch did, and that the gates of Eden will open for them. not because they forced their way in, but because they were invited. And here is the key. The guardians will not block them, the cherubim will not stop them, the flaming sword will not consume them, because the blood of Christ will have opened the way. The price will have been paid, and the faithful watchers will welcome them home. This is the message the Ethiopian church has protected for centuries. This is the truth that was deemed too dangerous for the Western canon. This is the story that connects Eden, the flood, the cross, and the end times into one coherent narrative. And this is the hope that sustains the faithful. Because Eden is not a memory, it is a promise. The tree of life is not a symbol, it is a reality. And the watchers who remained faithful are not myths. They are witnesses, witnesses of the fall, witnesses of the judgment, and witnesses of the restoration. And one day they will see humanity return, not in rebellion, not in corruption, but in redemption. And they will step aside, and they will allow the redeemed to pass, and they will rejoice because the assignment will finally be complete, the boundary will finally be crossed, and the story will finally reach its conclusion. But until that day, they watch, they guard, they protect, and they wait, because the gates of Eden are not closed forever. They are closed for now, and the watchers who never stopped watching are standing at those gates, ready, faithful, and hopeful. So here is the question for you. Are you ready? Are you seeking the way back through redemption? Or are you trying to force your way through knowledge, through power, through rebellion? Because the path back to Eden is narrow, it is guarded, and it is only open to those who come through the cross. The Ethiopian Bible has preserved this story because it matters, because it reveals the structure of the spiritual realm, because it connects the dots between the fall and the restoration, and because it warns us that the boundaries are real, that the guardians are real, that the guardians are real, and that the only way back is through Christ. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these hidden truths. Share this video with those who are searching, and comment below with your thoughts. Because the story of the Watchers is not over. The spiritual war is still being fought, and the final chapter is still being written. And when that final chapter comes, the faithful Watchers will finally rest, the gates will finally open, and the tree of life will finally be accessible again. Not to those who rebelled, not to those who corrupted, but to those who believed, to those who repented, to those who walked faithfully with God. And Eden, which was always more than a garden, will become what it was always meant to be. Not a fortress, not a prison, but a home, a dwelling place, a throne room where God and humanity walk together again, where the curse is lifted, where the corruption is removed, and where the watchers who never stopped watching finally see the fulfillment of their assignment. That is the hope, that is the promise, and that is the truth the Ethiopian Bible has protected for over 1,000 years. The watchers are still watching, the gates are still guarded, and the way back to Eden is still open, but only through the one who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." May you find that way, may you walk that path, and may you one day stand before the gates of Eden and hear the faithful watchers say, "Welcome home."